In this class, ribs, we're showing the differences between tastes of your beef chuck short ribs and your pork ribs, the different cuts from those two particular animals, and as well as the differences in taste amongst the wet ribs and our dry ribs. Right here we have some beef chuck short ribs. Over here we've got some pork back ribs, some St. Louis style pork ribs, and some spare ribs also on our pit. We've got 16 slabs on the pit today, as well as in the smokers. We ran out of grill space, so we put some up here. They'll probably get a little bit more smoke, but should be very good tender later on. We put these ribs on about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. They were expecting them to be done about 4 p.m. today. Our wood of choice today is oak. Burns real nicely, gives a good smoky flavor. We've seasoned our ribs with two different seasonings. We have wet ribs and dry ribs, kind of modeled after a Memphis style rub with the dry and the wet. Our wet ribs will be mopped later on, about 1 hour before we pull them, so probably around 3 o'clock we'll go ahead and start mopping them about every 10 to 15 minutes. The wet ribs are more of a sweet kind of taste, and our dry rubs are more of kind of a spicy taste and flavor to them. For our dry rub ribs, we rubbed them last night with a mixture of paprika, powdered garlic, mild chili powder, ground black pepper, kosher salt, yellow mustard seed, crushed celery seed, whole celery seed, dried crushed oregano, dried crushed thyme, whole allspice seeds, ground allspice, whole coriander seed, ground coriander seed, and accent. For our wet ribs, we have rubbed them the night before with a commercial rib rub. It's kind of a sweet rub, and later on we will be basting them with a sweet sauce that we made using butter, chopped onion, brown sugar, and tomato sauce. Before we rubbed our ribs last night, what we did is there's a connective tissue that surrounds or kind of overlaps all of these ribs right here on the inside. And what we did is we peeled that off, just starting at one of the ends, and just took it and almost like a sheet of paper, just kind of peeled it off all the way down the rib itself, the slab. And what that does is you just get rid of that added extra connective tissue. It yields a more tender cut of rib. Right now we're about midway through our cooking process. We're about on the 4th or 5th hour that the ribs have been on the pit itself. The reason we cook these ribs so long at such a low temperature is we want them to be very tender. That way whenever we slice them, they're almost just falling right off the bone. And they may become a little bit more dry, but what you can do to kind of counteract that is after they've been on the pit for a while, you can go ahead and wrap them in full, try to retain some of that moisture, and you'll still have tender but juicy ribs. The longer you cook any piece of meat, and at low temperatures, moist cookery methods especially, you break down a lot of that collagen into gelatin, and collagen is what makes up most of the connective tissue. So if you can break that down, you're going to have more tender cuts, better eating experience, and will achieve that meat just falling off the bone, which we want. And that's how you do it, is break down as much of that collagen as you can. We've already gone ahead and wrapped our first 2 racks of ribs. Just put them in the full, try to retain some of that moisture, keep them from drying out, and still they can sit on the pit, remain warm, continue breaking down that collagen and into gelatin, and hopefully we'll end up with some juicy, tender ribs. It's important whenever you fold your 2 sheets of foil together that you want to fold it in a fashion that the seams remain kind of upward in an upward position. That way you don't leak out any of your juices either into the bottom of your pit or onto yourself, burning yourself.
Right now we're taking the corn. We had it soaking in just plain water for about an hour. And we're pulling back the husks and we're putting them on the grill.
The objective of today's class was to characterize the different types of rubs on different cuts of meat, both from pork and from beef. And today we used a Memphis-style dry and wet rub for both our pork and beef cuts, and cooked over the same type of coals using oak wood and on our smoker pit.
And the general consensus of the class was that they liked the wet ribs over the dry ribs. The wet ribs were sweeter, and were more of a traditional barbecued rib. And the dry were, obviously, like the name implies, more dry. And the flavor wasn't as sweet. It had more spices associated with that rub. So they really felt like overall across all rib cuts, that the wet was the best. And they enjoyed those. They didn't really have one that they didn't like. They all just felt like the general consensus was the wet rib was better than the dry.